Good evening to you. My name is Reagan Devines. Thank you for joining us on From the South. We begin with the headlines. The left congratulates the right after Argentina's historic presidential election. New reserves make Venezuela the fifth largest gas producer in the world. And Belgium is at its highest terror threat level as authorities warn of an impending attack. The details on these stories and more right now. We begin in Argentina, where for the first time in 17 years in Latin America, the right has defeated an incumbent progressive government at the ballot box. With a pro-market and neoliberal rhetoric, Mauricio Macri won Sunday's presidential election by a tight 3% against Daniel Scioli, the candidate of the ruling Front for Victory, revealing a deeply divided Argentina. President-elect Mauricio Macri announced that he will have his first meeting with his predecessor, Cristina Fernandez, on Tuesday.
Cristina Kirchner congratulated me. She told me she was happy we had the first runoff of our country's history, that it has been a peaceful day in which Argentines choose this change, and she wished me good luck.
And Daniel Scioli called Macri to congratulate him on his victory and highlighted the value of democracy.
First of all, I want to greet the wonderful people of Argentina with all my affection and gratitude for an exemplary day of democracy, during which, by the will of the people, a new president has been elected, the engineer Mauricio Macri, whom I just greeted on the phone, wishing him success for our country's sake.
And one of the main differences between the two candidates was their foreign policies regarding Argentina's integration within international alliances. During his speech, President-elect Mauricio Macri said that he would improve Argentina's ties with the US and the European Union.
In what Mercosur does and its relationship with the European Union, I think that we have to give it vitality, restore the dynamics in Mercosur, to advance agreements in the European Union, converge towards the Pacific Alliance, and try to increase the capacity of trade in general. Because when we sell products made by Latin Americans, we will have more opportunities for progress.
And as our correspondent Leo Pobleti Coduti reports, despite his victory, Macri will likely face an uphill challenge building consensus in Parliament, where his coalition lacks a majority in both houses.
Mauricio Macri won the historic runoff election and will be Argentina's new president. The leader of the right-wing Cambiemos coalition won by a narrow margin and will take oath on December 10.
Thanks for believing that together we can build the Argentina we all dream of. This is a new era. It is a change of era, which I told you about, and you believed in it. That will be wonderful.
Macri harvested a much thinner victory than what opinion polls in the lead-up to the election indicated, victorious by a mere 3 percentage points. In his first speech as president-elect, he asked those Argentines who didn't vote for him to join him, and he said that Argentina has much to offer the world.
Today, I also want to talk to our Latin American brothers, to all the brothers of the world. I would like them to know that we want to have good relations with all countries. We want to work with everyone. We know that the Argentine people have much to contribute to the world.
Daniel Scioli of the ruling Front for Victory conceded electoral defeat a little after 9:30 p.m. when the amount of votes counted had just reached halfway. He acknowledged the will of the popular vote and said he hoped that the next government would protect the social achievements gained by the FPV governments.
Governments always fall short, but it's also fair to acknowledge everything that we have done to move forward, and we must look after all those achievements. That will surely be our responsibility from the 10th of December.
President-elect Macri will not have it easy in the Argentine parliament. His coalition will not have majority blocks neither in the Senate or in the lower house, trailing the FPV in both chambers. Leo Pobleti Coduti, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
The peace process between the FARC and the Colombian government continues, as the latter has announced that it will pardon 30 members of the FARC guerrillas. The decision comes as a token of goodwill on behalf of the government delegation. The pardoned men were jailed for rebellion and had not committed any acts of violence. The FARC guerrillas had issued a statement last week warning the government that many FARC prisoners were facing deteriorating health due to the poor conditions in prison. And the FARC leader Rodrigo Rondonio, also known as Timochenko, announced that the FARC and the government have reached agreements on 74 of the 75 points relating to transnational justice. The two sides had agreed to a general framework on this key aspect of the peace talks back in September. They now say that they want to reach a final peace accord before their agreed deadline of March 23, 2016.
For what they informed me, there's an agreement in 74 of the 75 points. Then I personally feel a very heavy burden of responsibility before Colombia and before the world for the commitment we have made before all the media and before that senior we all know.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says his country will be the #1 producer of gas in Latin America and the Caribbean region, thanks to a recent gas discovery. He said this at the Gas Exporting Countries Forum taking place in Iran's capital, Tehran, where the leaders of the gas-producing nations are meeting to discuss global gas prices, as well as bilateral relations, energy politics, and the fight against terrorism. Maduro added that his country has enjoyed economic and social advances with the Bolivarian Revolution, thanks to a process of reappropriating its natural resources started by the late Hugo Chavez.
Avanzado a través de nuestra revolución.
The president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, was also at the forum, where he met with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Morales announced the creation in Bolivia of one of the largest nuclear power plants in South America in cooperation with Russian state corporation Rosatom. About the oil prices, he said it's something that needs to be discussed.
We will evaluate. I think that there's a difference between oil and gas. There will be an important debate. We will share our views regarding the new global prices for hydrocarbons so that the prices of both oil and gas can recover at the same time.
Venezuela is now in the throes of election campaigning, and the socialist government's coalition is doing everything it can to ensure a majority. Over the weekend, supporters of the Gran Polo Patriótico managed to reach more than 7 million people to encourage them to vote on December 6th. Telesur's Isabel Finbao is there in Caracas. She filed this report.
More than 1 million grassroots supporters of Venezuela's socialist coalition took part in the election simulation. The aim, to put into practice the 1 for 10 strategy. For every 1 supporter, they must recruit and help 10 other people to vote for the Gran Polo Patriótico on election day.
Sea como sea, el pueblo a la asamblea.
Yesterday, then, we mobilized 1,816,042 people of the vanguard, with their name, their surname, their phone number, their identity number, their voting center, and their 1 for 10. This means that these immense vanguards of 1,816,042 touched more than 7.5 million people yesterday in the great practice for victory.
Members of the Bolivar Chavez battle units are tasked on December 6th with rallying around their community, directing them to transport to voting stations and ensuring that they know how to vote for the right candidate.
This is a great party which allows us to prepare ourselves for our elections on December 6th and to truly obtain the triumph that the revolution deserves.
As well as setting into motion the machinery to mobilize voters, the simulations are also a chance for people to familiarize themselves with the voting system and candidates.
In this deployment of the revision of the structure, we are in important deployment to know what we need to plan the routes, how we are going to transport our people, and how we are going to transport that day. helping everyone know where to vote, and that they know that to vote with the eyes of Chavez is to vote for all the complete structure.
We have to vote for the process of the revolution, for these achievements that we have had during these 16 years that have been 16 of fighting, and we have to continue with this process.
On December 6th, more than 19 million Venezuelans will be called upon to take part in parliamentary elections. Now, the government says it was pleased at both the turnout and the result of the simulation over the weekend. Now, that's because it demonstrates both the popularity the government still holds amongst its own supporters and its ability to reach out to the further electorate to encourage them to vote. Isabel Fimbo, Telesur, Caracas.
The Brazilian mining company responsible for the mud flow that killed at least 11 people in Minas Gerais is using local fishermen to bury the dead fish, and Samarco is paying the fishermen $27 per day to do it. The company agreed to pay a preliminary $262 million to cover the cleanup costs and compensation, a cost that it says already exceeded its insurance cap for civil damages. Samarco was also fined $65.5 million by Brazil's environmental regulator for violations including river pollution and damages to urban areas where water service has been suspended.
They have fishermen themselves collecting and burying the fish. I think there is a lack of conscience because I'm not sure they are really being paid. We didn't come upriver to rescue this dead, buried fish and show that to the population. I'm very angry. I can't stand seeing them being buried.
And the mud flow has spread across 2 states and has already reached the sea, causing widespread environmental and social damage. The burst dam caused 60 million cubic meters of toxic waste to pour out, the equivalent of 25,000 Olympic swimming pools across 500 kilometers. Fishermen say they have already seen stark effects to aquatic life, where sediment is settling and pH levels have already altered, posing serious threats to the livelihoods of communities and the economy of the region. This weekend has been especially violent for the representatives of the freedom of speech in Mexico, with several raids in journalists' homes and another photojournalist found dead in Veracruz. More with our correspondent Clayton Kahn.
Once again, journalists in Mexico are expressing outrage over another wave of attacks against media makers and the right to a free press. On Friday, it was reported that the home of veteran and critical journalist and columnist Gloria Muñoz Ramirez of the Mexican daily La Jornada, Gloria, whose major topics are of social movements and government corruption, her home was broken into, yet with no material valuable stolen. A day before the digital media outlet that Muñoz directs, Desinformémonos, suffered a cyber attack, losing a large portion of its archives and internal information. This attack only comes after more than a week after another prominent journalist, Anabel Fernandez of the weekly magazine Proceso, had her home broken into by a group of men and a woman. Again, no items of value were stolen. Now, Fernandez had recently done investigative reporting on the forced disappearances of the 43 Ayotzinapa students and corruption in the federal penitentiary, where drug boss Joaquin El Chapo Guzman had escaped earlier this year. Now, finally, a photojournalist named Juan Carlos Landa in the conflicted state of Veracruz was reported kidnapped last week and found dead over the weekend. He had signs of torture. Now, this whole wave of attacks and intimidation towards critical journalists comes after authorities have been called out for their inability of guaranteeing the physical integrity or basic rights of media makers. And according to Mexico's National Commission on Human Rights, Mexico suffers from an 89% impunity rate when it comes to investigating and prosecuting those who attack journalists. This is Clayton Kahn reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
Mexico City's Mayor Miguel Ángel Mancera presided over the marriages of 51 same-sex couples on Sunday in a local event declaring the capital as friendly to gay, lesbian, bisexual, transsexual, transvestite, transgender, and intersexual communities. Earlier this year, in June, Mexico's Supreme Court ruled that laws preventing gays to marry were unconstitutional. However, gay marriage is still banned in 29 of 31 of Mexico's states, and until state legislatures change their statuses, couples must still petition the courts case by case. And here's a look at what's coming up next. The global coalition against Daesh is increasing in number as nations talk unity to defeat terrorism. That story and more next. Authorities in Belgium are issuing warnings that an attack similar to the one in Paris that killed 130 people may be imminent. Police carried out border checks as part of an operation to find the suspected Islamist militant Salah Abdeslam, who has been on the run since the Paris attacks. 5 more people were arrested during searches of 7 houses in the Brussels and Liège regions early on Monday. Abdeslam is now the most wanted man in Europe. And France launched airstrikes from its newly stationed aircraft carrier on Daesh targets in Iraq. Strikes were carried out in Ramadi and Mosul as air support for ground forces there. Army Chief of Staff General Pierre de Villiers said that attacks would also be conducted from the aircraft carrier against targets in Syria this week. British Prime Minister David Cameron said that his government plans on spending over $200 billion over the next decade on armed forces. He said this would include buying and maintaining equipment to support UK Special Forces and also increasing the size of the deployable armed forces. He said this while addressing the Parliament in a bid to allow Britain's participation in the airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visited Abu Dhabi, where he met with his counterparts from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to discuss the coalition fight against Daesh. Kerry said there was a 3-pronged plan to deal with Daesh: a military campaign addressing stability in the region, as well as the refugee crisis, and thirdly, a diplomatic effort. Reports are that the Syrian government will be included in diplomatic talks in January to be mediated by the United Nations. Palestinian human rights organizations have submitted a joint report on Israeli war crimes during Operation Protective Edge to the International Criminal Court. Telesur's correspondent in Gaza, Noor Harazin, explains.
Palestinian human rights activists have announced at a press conference held in Gaza City that a report on the crimes committed by Israel during Operation Protective Edge against the Gaza Strip in 2014 has been submitted to the General Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. The press conference was held near the rubble of the Italian compound, a 13-story residential building in the Al-Nasr neighborhood of western Gaza City that was completely destroyed in an Israeli airstrike during the war. Relatives of those who were killed during the Israeli aggression, as well as representatives from the Palestinian Center for Human Rights and other sister Palestinian human rights NGOs in Gaza, took part in the press briefing. Telesur met with Raji Surani, a lawyer and Palestinian human rights activist, who said that the complaint focuses on 3 key aspects.
هذه المذكرة سوف تتناول 4 عناوين: العدوان على قطاع غزة في صيف العام 2014، والثاني الحصار المفروض على قطاع غزة وهو الحصار غير الإنساني وغير القانوني والذي يشكل ضرب من العقوبة الجماعية والاستيطان في.
In the summer of 2014, Israel launched a devastating aggression against the Gaza Strip, which claimed the lives of more than 2,100 Palestinians. The vast majority were civilians, including women and children, while more than 20,000 others were wounded. Noor Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
And here now is a brief look at other news stories around the world.
A Scottish firm has found a replacement for petrol and diesel, and it comes from the waste products of whiskey fermentation. The company readapted a fermentation process called acetone butanol ethanol, which was originally used 100 years ago, but abandoned due to the cheaper cost of petroleum at the time.
Butanol, which is our fuel, is an advanced fuel. It's a 4-carbon alcohol. So inherently, it has more energy. It has almost the same amount of energy as petrol, whereas bioethanol has only got 70% of it. You can store it and pipe it and use the existing infrastructure to distribute this, and in fact, you do not need to modify an engine. So this.
Pharmaceutical companies Pfizer and Allergan have announced a record-breaking $155 billion merger that would create the world's biggest drug maker by sales. The deal looks sure to prompt an international row over corporate tax avoidance. The small Kenyan community of Kibiria has created their own exchange currency. It is called the Lindi Pesa. The currency has been in operation for about 3 months, and residents say that it has already led to a bustling network of over 100 small businesses. A new group of armed Burundis have started to patrol the streets, yet they do not refer to themselves as a rebel movement. The group says they are out to defend their neighborhood and that other areas protect themselves in the same manner. Burundi has suffered major violence and civilian deaths since President Pierre Nkurunziza announced his bid for and won a 3rd term in office.
Mexico City is treating the Mexican tradition of lucha libre, wrestling with a museum exhibit there. The exhibit, entitled Lucha Libre Over Time, opened on November 19th and showcases over 1,000 masks, photos and other items from recent history of lucha libre, also known as free fighting wrestling. It's been organized by the Museum of the Objective of the Object, the MODO. The exhibit runs until March 27, 2016, and will also feature workshops for designing masks and some of the other items that are on display. And to close this evening, the red panda is generally a reclusive animal that spends most of its days sleeping. And unfortunately, due to poaching and other natural occurrences, their numbers in the wild have been reduced by 40% in the last 50 years. However, 2 red pandas have been added to the global population thanks to the efforts of Prospect Park Zoo in Brooklyn, New York. The young animals, one male and the other female, were born there earlier this year and made their public debut this month. In the wild, red pandas are few and far between, but could be found in Asia, China, and the Himalayas. Please feel free to join us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for more on these and other stories. And there is also extended coverage of major stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English. On behalf of our newsrooms in Quito, Ecuador, and here in Caracas, Venezuela, my name is Reagan Veens. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.